Another day, another deadline, and the next days will prove decisive. Iran now has until April 6th to accept a deal, and President Trump says great progress has been made. But is Iran's hardline parliamentary speaker really talking to Washington as Trump claims? And will the Strait of Hormuz reopen within the week or else? I'm Andrea Sankey, and this is the Newsmakers. Again, threatening to blow up plants that provide clean water and electricity to Iranian civilians, President Trump has said Tehran has 1 week to accept the terms of a U.S. deal. It's still not totally clear whom he's talking to, but some reports say it's actually Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, a hardliner with strong ties to Iran's Revolutionary Guard. It's ironic at best and at worst untrue. On social media, Ghalibaf said Trump's so-called truth is just a setup for insider trading, and he urged his followers to do the opposite of what Trump says if they also hope to make money. But Washington insists those hardliners are far more reasonable behind the scenes. So what's to be believed? Here's a look.
President Trump insists that Tehran's Speaker of Parliament and former Revolutionary Guard commander Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf is engaging with the US in back-channel negotiations and is desperate to do a deal. Publicly, at least, Tehran disagrees and has lashed out at the US's 15-point ceasefire proposal and denied any direct talks or involvement.
The materials that have been conveyed to us under various titles, such as the 15-point plan, mainly include very excessive, unrealistic and unreasonable demands.
Despite this, Trump insists a deal could be reached very soon, off the back of threatening to blow up Iran's electric power plants, oil wells, desalination plants and Karg Island, Iran's main oil export terminal, just 1 day prior. Early on Tuesday morning, a Kuwaiti ship was struck by an Iranian drone as it was docked near Dubai's port in the UAE. According to maritime shipping data, it was bound for China. But the Strait of Hormuz is only effectively closed because Tehran has threatened to strike any ships of unfriendly nations that try to cross it. But it's a different story for ships of nations Iran is on better terms with.
Through coordination with relevant parties, 3 Chinese vessels have recently transited the Strait of Hormuz. We express our appreciation to the relevant parties for the assistance provided.
In Iran, emergency workers search through rubble and damaged buildings targeted in incoming strikes. Iranian missiles were also seen over the skies of Israel overnight, with damage reported to cars in city streets. Early Tuesday, the US President Donald Trump had some choice words to say to nations that, in his view, didn't help the US reopen the Strait of Hormuz. In short, that they should get their own oil themselves, and the US isn't there to help you. Also suggesting that countries should buy their jet fuel from the US instead. 3 NATO nations also souring on the US president's demands to join the campaign. Italy denied the US access to an air base in Sicily. Spain refusing the US use of its airspace for any US military aircraft involved in the war. And France barring US military flights to Israel from its airspace. It lends credence to early reports suggesting Donald Trump may end his US campaign even if the Strait of Hormuz is not reopened to shipping.
So with very little clarity and contradictory statements, I'll turn to my panel now for their analysis. And joining me from Tehran, director of the think tank Diplomatic House of Iran, Hamidreza Gholamzadeh. From Washington, senior fellow at the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft, Khalid Elgindi. And also from the U.S. Capitol, Republican strategist and director of global affairs at Nestpoint Associates, Tim Phillips. Thanks all so much for joining me. So as per Trump's latest posts saying allies should be getting their own oil since they are not helping the U.S. open the Strait of Hormuz, we have to remember that both France and Italy have been talking to the Iranians to get their own energy supply deals. France just blocked Israel from using its airspace. Italy just denied the U.S. access to an airbase in Sicily. So, Khaled, I'll start with you. Might some be negotiating deals for their own oil rather than going to war for them, as the U.S. might want, and in which case Trump's post kind of shows maybe a level of desperation?
Yeah, I mean, I think both of those are true. I think the Europeans are much more reliant on Gulf oil than is the United States. I think it's another sign of how poorly planned this entire military operation was on the part of the Americans and the Israelis. The fact that they couldn't even recruit any allies up front. And I think it also speaks to, as you said, the desperation of this administration, who has not really had a plan or a strategy or an end game or an exit strategy for this war from really the very first week. I think they expected that the war would end in within a week, and when that didn't happen, they've sort of been making it up as they go along, which has been really, really disastrous.
Let me turn to Tehran then, and I'll ask Hamid Reza how much you think Iran is actually willing to negotiate separately with individual U.S. allies to allow, their energy and other supplies through the straits in exchange for non-cooperation with the U.S. and Israel, as we're starting to see with France and Italy.
One of the most important outcomes of this conflict for Iran would be a new framework for the situation in the Strait of Hormuz. And first of all, it includes strategically, let's say, expulsion of the Americans from the region, closure of the American bases in other countries. But more importantly, the way vessels can go through the Strait of Hormuz. It includes some tariffs or tolls, we can say, for the strait, and also some conditions that have been mentioned, not officially, but it seems that it has been official, and there have been some cases that vessels that are trading in Chinese RMB, Chinese yuan, are allowed to pass through. So Iran is setting a new framework so that if any vessels want to go through the Strait of Hormuz, it needs to coordinate with Iran and needs to have the permission or pay something, and everything would be arranged with Iran, and there is no Americans or American petrodollars involved in that procedure. So that's the most strategic outcome that Iran can benefit from this recent ongoing aggression that is in place right now. With that, Americans don't have any much to say in at least Middle East oil. And of course, if this Chinese yuan framework is in place, then US petrodollars would be targeted as well. So the position of US dollar would be weakened. I'm not going to be ruined, but it would be weakened in the at least oil trade in the Middle East, which is of course 20% of the oil market of the world.
Oh, let me ask Tim then. I mean, where does all of this leave Washington? We've seen that ships can get through the Strait of Hormuz. Chinese ships have been going through. We've got 2 U.S. allies now talking to the Iranians. There's been some talk that the UK might start a conversation next. Hamid Reza was actually talking about the devaluation, really, of the dollar because it won't be as tied to oil trade in the Gulf as it has been. So is President Trump starting to feel, maybe even look a bit desperate? Or do you still think this is all part of his master negotiation tactics?
I think to call it desperate is a dramatic, bordering on comical overstatement. 22 nations, including some of our key allies, of decades have said we are open and we're going to figure out how to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. Anytime you have a coalition that large, sovereign nations involved, there's always ongoing discussions. President Trump has a way of negotiating publicly. You can argue about how effective or ineffective it is, but what is central is that Iran's military and industrial capabilities, its ability to fund its terrorist network around the world to threaten its neighbors, to kill people, including its own citizens, has been dramatically degraded, dramatically. Our oldest bombers can fly over Iran with impunity at this point because they've been so, their defense systems have been so weakened. So yes, getting the Strait of Hormuz reopened is a challenge, and we're working on it. The United States is, and I think the allies are trying to figure out that as well. But make no mistake, the Iranians are being devastated across the board, and they're using the leverage in the Strait of Hormuz to try to stay relevant in this fight, and it is. But I think this is a bump in the road. I would not call it some kind of desperation moment when you look at the balance and the throw weight and the destruction being wrought upon Iran at this point.
Okay, Khalid, we've heard that over and over again, that Iran's military capabilities have been so severely degraded, but everyone's pointing out the U.S. still hasn't won, and the Strait of Hormuz is still blocked, and the global economy is still in turmoil because the United States hasn't won. They haven't got what they wanted. So are they still ahead, though? Because when you do listen to Republican analysts like Tim, it's just a matter of time. This is a bump in the road.
Yeah, I mean, it really comes down to how do we define victory, really for either side, but particularly for the United States, where the goalposts have shifted endlessly since the beginning of this war. There's been no clear strategy, no clear exit ramp, and so it's only natural that the president would. I think if Donald Trump wanted to exit this war, he could, but he needs a victory narrative. He needs something to hang his hat on. Either the regime collapses or something major happens that he can use to declare victory. Otherwise, he sort of painted himself into a corner, because without laying out what the objectives are, of course, the United States is able to. The United States is a superpower. Iran is not. So the fact that the United States has been able to do damage to Iranian defenses is really not surprising. The point is, politically and in terms of the global economy, what sort of price is being paid? Is the United States going to come out of this with its credibility intact? I think that is unlikely. I think very few people are going to trust the United States. And then we were already seeing the knock-on effects in terms of disrupting trade and oil markets and global markets. And I think it's very likely that we're going to see a worldwide recession as a result. So what does victory mean? Is it simply blowing things up? Sure, the United States can do that very well. But is there a political objective that brings stability to the region? That seems very unlikely.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, that's why so many comparisons as well have been made to the Vietnam War, because militarily, it's been said the U.S. won almost every battle in the field, but still lost the war in the end. So we'll see how this conflict, if it will unroll the same way. But let me move to Hamid Reza now, because we need to talk about what the U.S. is saying, in whom they've been negotiating with, the U.S. line that they have been negotiating directly with Iran's Speaker of Parliament. I mean, what do you know about that? Is it actually, could it be possible?
I think it's almost clear to everyone, even to the mainstream media in the West, that President Trump cannot be trusted in what he said. There has been no negotiations or anything you can call it a negotiation. There have been some messages sent from the Americans through some intermediaries, including Pakistan, to Iran, but it doesn't mean that it has been negotiations. They sent 15 items as a suggestion. Iran rejected them. They asked for negotiations. Iran rejected that. There is nothing such as negotiations or talks between the two sides. Yes, they have sent a message, and Iran has a clear message as an answer to that Iran is not going to negotiate because, first of all, they are continuing the aggression. Second, they are accumulating forces here, and they're talking about the battleground and even an atomic bomb against Iran. And with that, you cannot have actually the stick on one way and the carrot in the other way as a negotiation, which Iran have been in the middle of that for the two times that they have attacked Iran for the past 1 year. Two times Iran was in negotiations, and both times and they attacked Iran. So there is no grounds for that. Public opinion in Iran is totally, and believe me, totally against negotiations. So no one is asking for negotiations. Anyone is not doing that. Iran says that I need to fight it to the end. And I do not agree with you comparing it to Vietnam, because Iran is right now devastating American bases in the region and is not allowing the United States to act here freely. Of course, Iran is not going to attack the American mainland in the United States, but it is attacking military bases here, and Americans are not able to defend themselves. And the word desperation that you mentioned, I think, is a correct word for the current situation of President Trump.
Okay, let me ask Tim then, because Tim, you've said before that Trump, you said he shouldn't be taken literally, but he should be taken seriously. And it sounds like you kind of get to have it both ways in that sense, that he's allowed to lie or contradict himself, but still should be taken seriously. And is this what we're seeing now in the rhetoric back and forth with Iran?
When you look at the world stage and the successes from a foreign policy perspective of this Trump administration, one would do well to take him seriously. And I do think that is happening. It's important to note this war or conflict has been going on just over 1 month. Everyone is talking about how, oh my goodness, how much longer is it going to go? When you look from a historical perspective, 1 month, just over 1 month, is not a very long time to have a conflict that's going. The most consistent strategic aim that the United States Trump administration has called for is eliminating the ability of Iran to have nuclear weapons. And it's interesting, that's not a controversial position in the United States. Joe Biden said the same thing. Barack Obama said the same thing. George W. Bush said the same thing. Presidents for almost 3 decades, I guess, have said that. It's just this president felt it was time. They were getting too close to being able to have the operational capability, and he decided to act. I think that is the most important strategic point that the administration has consistently made. Yes, he's moved the goalpost around on other items, but that ending of a nuclear threat from a terrorist regime like Iran, which is pretty widely accepted in the West. France has said that, Macron has said that, the British have said that. It's just at a certain point when they refused, not for years, but for decades, the Iranians, to seriously negotiate and move to eliminate the weapons capability. Finally, the United States took action here.
Okay. I mean, Khaled, I saw you kind of sigh with some exasperation because, yeah, for years and years and years, Israel in particular had said that Iran was always 2 weeks away or a few months away from building a nuclear weapon, and that was never the case, as we did see it unfold over the years. But I still need to ask you about the level of negotiation or messaging going back and forth, because the U.S. saying that it's been talking to high-level people in Iran could remind one of, the theory that Washington is trying to kind of cut and paste its Venezuela model here, assuming that there are people within the Iranian regime who would want to undermine their own and kind of take power with U.S. help. Do you think that's maybe what the U.S. is after here? It's simple, but they think it worked in Venezuela, and are they still maybe trying that model in Iran?
I think they're looking for anything that they can call a victory. If they can find someone in Iran who they can dub to be the new leadership and have that actually be credible before the Iranian people, which I think is highly unlikely. But if they could, then that would be their exit ticket out of this disastrous war that the United States and Israel started. Iran is not Venezuela, and I think they realized that very early in this war. I think they expected the regime would collapse after the decapitation operation and the senior leadership was taken out. That didn't happen. I think the United States, I think Trump is projecting when he talks about these negotiations and Iran is giving me gifts. I think there is a lot of projection there. I don't think there are messages being delivered back and forth, but I don't think it's fair to call them a negotiation. And that is for one simple reason. The Iranians don't trust Donald Trump or any of his envoys or anyone in his administration, because on two different occasions in which the Iranians were in fact negotiating with the United States over its nuclear program, they were attacked in the midst of those negotiations. So from Iran's standpoint, the United States, Donald Trump in particular, uses those negotiations as cover to launch his military war. And so they simply don't trust them. But I think it's important to go back to this point that was made earlier. Iran had been negotiating. We had a deal called the JCPOA that would have restrained Iran's nuclear program, would have put it under international inspection. And who ripped that up? It was Donald Trump. And so what did we see? We saw an immediate rush by Iran to enrich uranium after that. But I think the biggest tell is last June, Donald Trump told us that he had already obliterated Iran's nuclear program. And so what was the purpose of this new war? Yeah. So it's not just that the goalposts keep shifting, they're imaginary goalposts.
Speaking of imaginary, then, Khaled, very quickly, the U.S., through its spokespeople, keeps insisting that they are now speaking to, quote, more reasonable people on the Iranian side. Is that a lie? Are these more reasonable people in existence, or do they mean they're speaking to people in what they consider the opposition, which is actually the diaspora?
I think that's probably a question better put to our friend in Tehran than to me. I don't have that kind of information.
Yeah, then I wanted to see if you had kind of an analyst perspective on it. But then let me ask Hamid Reza, who are these more reasonable people? Are you saying it's entirely made up?
Imaginary people in his own mind. There is no negotiations, as I said. I have been in touch with actually the assistant of the parliament speaker. I talked to him, and there is no negotiation with Mr. Ghalibaf, and there is no negotiation with anyone else. It's just a news made up by a lie made up by President Trump in order to control the market, in order to say that we are making some achievements. And it's totally lie. It's simply a lie. And I'm surprised that people are still taking him serious, what he says, because there is no negotiations here. And that's why the Europeans are now considering talks with Iran, because they have realized that you cannot open Strait of Hormuz through military force, and you need to have negotiations for trade. And Europeans, the Italians, the French, the British, and the others are finding out about that, and they're trying their chance. So no, there is no one as reasonable or anyone else.
Yeah, let me give Tim a final word then here, because Hamid Reza actually brought up what I introduced this program with in part, and the fact that Iran says this really is about Trump trying to manipulate the markets. Whatever he says, it actually goes back to insider trading they believe is going on. What do you make of that?
What a silly accusation, in my opinion. I, the Iranian regime, the people talking and saying what they're saying about these negotiations or non-negotiations, they're the same people who told the world, no, we did not kill tens of thousands of our own citizens and in cold blood on the streets of our cities when they came out to ask for freedom and better treatment and a better life. We didn't kill them. In fact, it was the
And we did
Mossad
not.
and the CIA doing this. So people to act like they have credibility and they should be believed in serious
Can you prove
conversation
that
when the
thing?
world
Tens of thousands
watched
of killing. Can
what
you
they
prove
did
that?
to their own citizens, murdering women, children in cold blood,
Tim, prove
torturing
that.
them. The world is not going to believe what they're talking about right now. We may have a few elites who want to say, oh, this is a serious discussion from a regime. The world has seen what they do to their own people and then how they lie about it. The credibility is not there.
Okay. Unfortunately, that will have to be the final word. Hamid Reza, I know you entirely disagree with everything Tim had just said there, but we're completely out of time for this edition
Let's have a discussion
of the
about those
program.
protests and the murders.
Yeah, on another program, would love to, but that's all the time we have for today. So I'd like to thank all three of my panelists so much for being with us, our viewers for joining us as well. Remember, you can follow us on social media, and do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.